Well, hi there. How's it going, everybody? I hope you guys are having a great day. I've had a pretty good day. I worked, but it was a good work day, so no complaints. I hope everybody. Thank you, Moocher, for being here, and anybody else who could be lurking or watching this later. I appreciate it very much. I'm going just fine. A bit sleepy because changing schedule. You have to go to 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and a week later back again. Yeah, that's kind of how, like, in my job, like, there's the 7 a.m. to 3 o'clock shift, and then there's the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift, and every week my schedule is different, so I could be on morning shifts or night shifts or a combination of the two. Sometimes my body gets really confused. I so love when I remember your southern accent. I try not to... I feel like it only comes out, like, certain times. Or, like, certain words. But yeah. I'm glad you like it. Alright, well, I have 5 chapters left to read of this book, and we're done with this one. And we'll be moving on to the next. So, I guess, without further ado, I'll just jump right in. As always, if there's any issue with the music being too loud... Oh, hi Riddy, how are you? Thank you. If there's any issue with the sound being too loud or too quiet, just let me know, and I will fix it accordingly. I'm going to move my mic, so excuse any popping you hear. Alright. So, without further ado, we're starting on Chapter 9. Chapter 9. The curious thing about being told to sleep on it, a phrase which here means, as I'm sure you know, to go to bed thinking about something and reach a conclusion in the morning, is that you usually can't. If you are thinking over a dilemma, you are likely to toss and turn all night long, thinking over terrible things that can happen and trying to imagine what in the world you can do about it, and these circumstances are unlikely to result in any sleeping at all. Just last night, I was troubled by a decision involving an eyedropper, a greedy night watchman, and a tray of individual custards, and this morning I am so tired that I can scarcely type these words. These worfs. And so it was with the Baudelaire orphans that night, after Esme Squalor had told them to sleep on it and decide the next morning whether or not to throw Madame Lulu to the lions and join Count Olaf's troop. The children, of course, had no intention of becoming part of a band of villains or tossing anyone into a deadly pit. But Esme had also asked them what in the world they would do if they decided not to join Count Olaf, and this was the question that kept them tossing and turning in their hammocks, which are particularly uncomfortable places to toss and turn. The Baudelaires hoped that instead of joining Count Olaf, they would travel through the hinterlands in a motorized roller coaster cart of Violet's invention, accompanied by Madame Lulu, in her undisguised identity of Olivia, along with the archival library from underneath the table of the fortune-telling tent, in the hopes of finding one of the Baudelaire parents alive and well at the VFD headquarters in the Mortmain Mountains. But this plan seemed so complicated that the children worried over all that could go wrong and spoil the whole thing. Violet thought about the lightning device that she planned to turn into a fan belt and wondered that there wouldn't be sufficient torque to make the carts move the way they needed to. Klaus worried that the archival library wouldn't contain specific directions to the headquarters and they would get lost in the mountains, which were rumored to be enormous, confusing, and filled with wild animals. Sunny worried that they might not find enough to eat in the hinterlands, and all 3 Baudelaires worried that Madame Lulu would not keep her promise, and would reveal the orphans' disguise when Count Olaf asked about them the next morning. The siblings worried about these things all night, and although in my case, the dessert chef managed to find my hotel room and knock on my window just before dawn, the Baudelaire orphans found that when morning came and they were done sleeping on it, that they hadn't reached any other conclusion but that their plan was risky, and the only one they could think of. As the first rays of the sun shone through the window onto the potted plants, the Baudelaires quietly lowered themselves out of their hammocks. Hugo, Colette, and Kevin had announced that they were ready to join Count Olaf's troop and didn't need to sleep on it, and as so often happens with people who have nothing to sleep on, the children's co-workers were sleeping soundly and did not awaken as the siblings left the caravan to get to work on their plan. Count Olaf and his troop had dug the lion's pit alongside the ruined roller coaster, so close that the children had to walk along its edge to reach the ivy-covered carts. The pit was not very deep, although its walls were just high enough that nobody could climb out if they were thrown inside, and it was not very large, so all the lions were as crowded together as they had been in the trailer. Like the Baudelaire's co-workers, the lions must not have had much to sleep on, and they were still dozing in the morning sun. Sound asleep, the lions did not look particularly ferocious. Some of their manes were all tangled as if no one had brushed them for a long time, and sometimes one of their legs twitched as if they were dreaming of better days. On their backs and bellies were several nasty scars from the whippings Count Olaf had given them, which made the Baudelaires sore just looking at them, and most of the lions were very, very thin, as if they'd not eaten a good meal in quite some time. "I feel sorry for them," Violet said, looking at one lion who was so skinny that all of its ribs were visible. "If Madame Lulu was right, these lions were once noble creatures, and now look how miserably Count Olaf has treated them." "They look lonely," Klaus said, squinting down into the pit with a sad frown. "Maybe they're orphans too." "Maybe they have a surviving parent," Violet said, "somewhere in the Mortmain Mountains." "Ida Surik," Sunny said, which meant something like, "Maybe someday we can rescue these lions." "For now, let's rescue ourselves," Violet said with a sigh. "Klaus, let's see if we can untangle the ivy from this cart in the front. We'll probably need 2 carts. One for passengers and one for the archival library, so Sunny, see if you can get the ivy off that other one." "Easy," said Sunny, pointing to her teeth. "All the caravans are on wheels," Klaus said. "Would it be easier to hitch up one of the caravans to the lightning device?" "A caravan is too big," Violet replied. "If you wanted to move a caravan, you'd have to attach it to an automobile or several horses. We'll be lucky if I can rebuild the cart's engines. Madame Lulu said that they were rusted away." "Well, it seems like we're hitching our hopes to a risky plan," Klaus said, tearing away at a few strands of ivy with the one arm he could use. "But I suppose it's no more risky than plenty of other things we've done, like stealing a sailboat. Or climbing up an elevator shaft," Violet said. "Whack," Sunny said, with her mouth full of plants, and her siblings knew she meant something along the lines of, "or pretending to be surgeons." "Actually," Violet said, "maybe this plan isn't so risky after all. Look at the axles on this cart." "Axles?" Klaus asked. "The rods that hold the wheels in place," she explained, pointing to the bottom of the cart. "They're in perfect condition. That's good news because we need these wheels to carry us a long way." The eldest Baudelaire looked up from her work and gazed out at the horizon. To the east, the sun was rising, and soon its rays would reflect off the mirrors positioned in the fortune-telling tent. But to the north, she could see the Mortmain Mountains rising up in odd square shapes, more like a staircase than a mountain range, with patches of snow on the higher places, and the top steps covered in a thick gray fog. "It'll take a long time to get up there," she said, "and it doesn't look like there's a lot of repair shops on the way." "I wonder what we'll find up there," Klaus said. "I've never been to the headquarters of anything." "Neither have I," Violet said. "Here, Klaus, lean down with me so I can look at the engine of this cart." "If we knew more about VFD," Klaus said, "we might know what to expect. How does the engine look?" "Not too bad," Violet said. "Some of these pistons are completely rusted away, but I think I can replace them with these latches on the sides of the cart, and the lightning device will provide a fan belt. But we'll need something else. Something like twine or wire to help connect the 2 carts." "Ivy?" Sunny asked. "Good idea, Sunny," Violet said. "The stems of the ivy feel solid enough. If you pluck the leaves off a few strands, you'd be a big help." "What could I do?" Klaus asked. "Help me turn this cart over," Violet said, "but watch where you put your feet. We don't want you falling into the pit." "I don't want anyone falling into the pit," Klaus said. "You don't think the others will throw Madame Lulu to the lions, do you?" "Not if we get this done in time," Violet said grimly. "See if you can help me bend the latch so that it fits into that notch, Klaus. No, the other way. I just hope Esme doesn't have them throw somebody else in when we all escape." "She probably will," Klaus said, struggling with the latch. "I can't understand why Hugo, Colette, and Kevin want to join up with people who do such things." "I guess they're just happy that anybody's treating them like normal people," Violet said, and glanced into the pit. One of the lions yawned, stretched its paws, and opened one sleepy eye, but seemed uninterested in the 3 children working nearby. "Maybe that's why the hook-handed man works for Count Olaf, or the bald man with the long nose. Maybe when they tried to work someplace else, everyone laughed at them. Or maybe they just like committing crimes," Klaus said. "Well, that's a possibility too," Violet said, and then frowned at the bottom of the cart. Oh, I wish I had Mother's toolkit, she said. She had this tiny wrench I always admired, and it'd be just perfect for this job. She'd probably be a better help than I am, Klaus said. I can't make head or tail of what you're doing. You're doing fine, Violet said, particularly if you consider that we're sharing a shirt. How are those ivy stems coming, Sonny? Lasoint, Sonny replied, which meant I'm nearly done. Good work, Violet said, peering at the sun. I'm not sure how much time we have. Count Olaf is probably inside the fortune-telling tent by now, asking the crystal ball about our whereabouts. I hope Madame Lulu keeps her promise and doesn't give him what he wants. Will you hand me that piece of metal on the ground, Klaus? It looks like it used to be part of the tracks, but I'm going to use it to make a steering device. I wish Madame Lulu could give us what we want, Klaus said, handing the piece to his sister. I wish we could find out if one of our parents survived the fire without wandering around a mountain range. Me too, Violet said, and even then we might not find them. They could be down here looking for us. Remember the train station? Klaus said, and Violet nodded. Isubak, Sonny said, handing over the ivy stems. By Isubak, she meant something like, I don't remember, although there was no way she could have, as the youngest Baudelaire had not been born at the time her siblings were remembering. The Baudelaire family had decided to go away for the weekend to a vineyard, a word which here means a sort of farm where people grow grapes used in wine. This vineyard was famous for having grapes that smelled delicious, and it was very pleasant to picnic in the fields while the fragrance drifted in the air and the vineyard's famous donkeys, who helped carry bushels of grapes at harvest time, slept in the shade of the grapevines. To reach the vineyard, the Baudelaires had to take not one train but two, transferring at a busy station not far from Paltryville. And on the day that Violet and Klaus were remembering, the children had been separated from their parents in the rush of the transferring crowd. Violet and Klaus, who were quite young, decided to search for their parents in the row of shops just outside the station, and soon the local shoemaker, blacksmith, chimney sweep, and computer technician were all helping the two frightened children look for their mother and father. Soon enough, the Baudelaire family was reunited, but the children's father had taught them a serious lesson. If you lose us, he said, stay put. Yes, their mother agreed. Do not go wandering around looking for us. We will come find you. At the time, Violet and Klaus had solemnly agreed, but times had changed. When the Baudelaire parents had said, if you lose us, they were referring to times when the children might lose sight of them in a crowd, as they had at the train station that day, where I had lunch just a few weeks ago and talked to the shoemaker's son about what had happened. They were not referring to the way the Baudelaires had lost them now, in a deadly fire that it seemed had claimed at least one of their lives. There are times to stay put, and what you want will come to you. And there are times to go out into the world and find such a thing for yourself. Like the Baudelaire orphans, I have found myself in places where staying put would be dangerously foolish and foolishly dangerous. I have stood in a department store and seen something written on a price tag that told me I had to leave at once, but in different clothing. I have sat in an airport and heard something over the loudspeaker that told me I had to leave later that day, but on a different flight. And I have stood alongside the roller coaster at Caligari Carnival and known what the Baudelaires could not possibly have known that quiet morning. I have looked at the carts, all melted together and covered in ash, and I have gazed into the pit dug by Count Olaf and his henchmen, and have seen all the burnt bones lying in a heap. And I have picked through the bits of mirror and crystal where the fortune-telling tent once stood, and all this research has told me the same thing. And if somehow I could slip back in time as easily as I could slip out of the disguise that I am in now, I would walk to the edge of that pit and tell the Baudelaire orphans the results of my findings. But of course I cannot. I can only fulfill my sacred duty and type this story as best I can, down to the last whorf. Whorf, Sonny said when the Baudelaires had finished telling her about the train station. By whorf, she meant something along the lines of, I don't think we should stay put, I think we should leave right now. Well, we can't leave yet, Violet said. The steering device is ready and the carts are firmly attached to one another. But without a fan belt, the engine won't work. We'd better go to the fortune-telling tent and dismantle the lightning device. Olaf? Sonny said. Let's hope that Madame Lulu has sent him on his way, Violet said. Otherwise we'll be cutting it close. We have to finish our invention before the show begins, otherwise everyone will see us get in the carts and leave. There was a faint growl from the pit, and the children saw that most of the lions were awake and looking around crankily at their surroundings. Some of them were trying to pace around their cramped quarters, but they only managed to get in the way of other lions, which only made them crankier. These lions look hungry, Klaus said. I wonder if it's almost showtime. Ackluck, Sonny said, which meant let's move out, and the Baudelaires moved out, walking away from the roller coaster and toward the fortune-telling tent. As the children walked through the carnival, they saw that quite a few visitors had already arrived, and some of them giggled at the siblings as they made their way. "Look," one man said, pointing at the Baudelaires with a sneer. "Freaks! Let's be sure to go to the lion show later. One of them might get eaten." "Oh, I hope so," said his companion. "I didn't come all this way out here to the hinterlands for nothing." "The woman at the ticket booth told me that a journalist from the Daily Punctilio is here to report on who gets devoured," said another man who was wearing a Caligari Carnival t-shirt he'd apparently purchased at the gift shop. "The Daily Punctilio?" cried the woman who was with him. "How exciting! I've been reading about those Baudelaire murderers for weeks. I just love violence." "Who doesn't?" the man replied, "especially when it's combined with sloppy eating." Just as the Baudelaires reached the fortune-telling tent, a man stepped in front of them and blocked their way. The children looked up at the pimples on his chin and recognized him as the very rude member of the audience at the House of Freaks. "Why, look who's here," he said. "It's Chabo the wolf baby, and Beverly and Elliot, the two-headed freak." "It's very nice to see you again," Violet said quickly. She tried to walk around him, but he grabbed the shirt she was sharing with her brother, and she had to stop so he wouldn't tear the shirt and reveal their disguise. "What about your other head?" the pimpled man asked sarcastically. "Doesn't he think it's nice to see me?" "Of course," Klaus said, "but we're in a bit of a hurry, so if you'll excuse us." "I don't excuse freaks," the man said. "There's no excuse for them. Why don't you wear a sack over one of your heads so you look normal?" "Grrr," Sunny said, baring her teeth at the man's knees. "Please leave us alone, sir," Violet said. "Chabo's very protective of us and might bite you if you get too close." "I bet Chabo's no match for a bunch of ferocious lions," the man said. "I can't wait till the show, and neither can my mother." "That's right, dear," said a woman who was standing nearby. She stepped forward to give the pimpled man a big kiss, and the Baudelaires noticed that pimples seemed to run in the family. "What time does the show start, freaks?" "The show starts right now." The pimpled man and his mother turned around to see who had spoken, but the Baudelaires did not have to look to know it was Count Olaf who had made the announcement. The villain was standing at the entrance to the fortune-telling tent with a whip in his hand and a particularly nasty gleam in his eye, both of which the siblings recognized. The whip, of course, was the one that Count Olaf used to encourage the lions to become ferocious, which the Baudelaires had seen the previous day, and the gleam was something they had seen more times than they could count. It was the sort of gleam that someone might get in their eye when they were telling a joke, but when Count Olaf looked at people that way, it usually meant that one of his schemes was succeeding brilliantly. "The show starts right now," he announced again to the people gathering around him. "I've just had my fortune told, so I've gotten what I've wanted." Count Olaf pointed at the fortune-telling tent with his whip and then turned around to point at the disguised Baudelaires as he grinned at the crowd. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to go to the lion pit so we can give the rest of you what you want." That's the end of chapter 9, and I shall catch up. Music sounds good? Okay, good. Werfs. Typing werfs is dangerous. Werfs, werfs, werfs. I'm a man of action. How does this say? The torque. I gotta have some torque. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you to whoever hosted me. I haven't gotten that far back down. In regards to this show, so I was a dummy, obviously, on New Year's Day, and I forgot to post in Discord that I was watching that show. So it was just me, Holland, and Tara there. It was great. But I'd like to watch it again, and be able to show you guys the show if you haven't seen it yet. So my question is would you like me to schedule that soon? Because I have some free time coming up in the next week, that would be a good time to schedule that, if you guys would want to watch it with me. If you guys would rather just watch it on your own, though, that's not going to hurt my feelings, and you can just let me know. So if it's something you want me to schedule, I can schedule that in place of some streams. Not all my streams, obviously, but just some of them. I can use some of my stream slots for rabbiting that again. Or if you want to watch it by yourself, just let me know, and I won't worry about planning it. So I'm just throwing that out there. Violence and sloppy eating. Heartless might have me play it again for her birthday. So months. I've been terrible. It's okay. Thank you for the host, Tara. I appreciate that. And thank you for the claps. Hope you guys are doing well. Thank you for being here. You guys, for sures. So, I'll get your opinions about planning that, and you can just let me know. I'd be glad to watch with you as long as it were convenient time. Oh, yeah, no, I would just plan it like I plan streams. So, and I'll just post my schedule in the little schedule Discord and all of that. And I apologize for my major lack of communication on New Year's Day and forgetting to post in Discord that I was opening my room. I just thought everybody was really busy that day, and then, so, apologies again. I know I've already apologized about that, but I'm apologizing again. It was a lapse of smartness. I don't know. Okay. Alright, we shall move along. We have 4 more chapters. Just say "whoosp" and we'll forgive you. And no, Tara, I think it's just been a busy year, and, you know, when you stream, it's definitely worth the wait, so don't feel pressured to stream more than you want to. I'll say "whisp" and you will forgive me. Yoy. Okay, anyway. Chapter 10. I'm going to the pit right now, cried a woman in the crowd. I want to have a good view of the show. So do I, said a man standing next to her. There's no point in having lions eat somebody if you can't watch it happen. Well, then we'd better hurry, said the man with pimples on his chin. There's quite a crowd here. The Baudelaire orphans looked around and saw that the pimpled man was speaking the truth. News of Caligari Carnival's latest attraction must have spread far beyond the hinterlands because there were many more visitors than yesterday, and there seemed to be more and more arriving every minute. I'll lead the way to the pit, announced Count Olaf. After all, the lion show was my idea, so I should get to walk in front. It was your idea? Asked a woman the children recognized from their stay at Heimlich Hospital. She was wearing a gray suit and chewing gum as she spoke into a microphone, and the siblings remembered that she was a reporter from the Daily Punctilio. I'd love to write about it in the newspaper. What is your name? Count Olaf, Count Olaf said proudly. I can see the headline now. Count Olaf thinks up idea for lion show, said the reporter. Wait until the readers of the Daily Punctilio see that. Wait a minute, someone said. I thought Count Olaf was murdered by those 3 children. That was Count Omar, replied the reporter. I should know. I've been writing about the Baudelaires for the Daily Punctilio. Count Omar was murdered by those 3 Baudelaire children who still remain at large. Well, if anyone ever finds them, someone in the crowd said, we'll throw them into the lion pit. An excellent idea, Count Olaf replied. But in the meantime, the lions will have a meal of one delicious freak. Follow me, everyone, for an afternoon of violence and sloppy eating. Hooray! Cried several members of the crowd as Olaf took a bow, and began to lead everyone in the direction of the ruined roller coaster where the lions were waiting. Come with me, freaks, Count Olaf ordered, pointing at the Baudelaires. My assistants are bringing the others. We want you all assembled for the choosing ceremony. I will bring them, my Olaf, Madame Lulu said in her disguised accent, emerging from the fortune-telling tent. When she saw the Baudelaires, her eyes widened, and she quickly held her hands behind her back. You lead crowd to pit, please, and give interview to newspaper on way. Oh, yes, said the reporter. I can see the headline now. Exclusive interview with Count Olaf, who is not Count Omar, who is dead. Wait until the readers of the Daily Punctilio see that. It will be exciting for people to read about me, Count Olaf said. All right, I'll walk with the reporter, Lulu, but hurry up with the freaks. Yes, my Olaf, Madame Lulu said. Come with me, freaky peoples, please. Lulu held out her hands for the Baudelaires to take as if she were their mother, instead walking them across the street instead of a fake fortune teller leading them to a pit of lions. The children could see that one of Madame Lulu's palms had an odd streak of dirt on it, while the other hand was closed in an odd, tight fist. The children did not want to take those hands and walk toward the lion show, but there were so many people gathered around, eagerly expecting violence, that it seemed they had no other choice. Sunny grabbed a hold of Lulu's right hand, and Violet grabbed Lulu's left, and they walked together in an awkward knot in the direction of the ruined roller coaster. Klaus started to say, but then looked around the crowd and realized it would be foolish to use her real name. I mean, Madame Lulu, he corrected himself and then leaned across Violet to speak as quietly as he could. Let's walk as slowly as we can. Maybe we can find an opportunity to sneak back to the tent and dismantle the lightning device. Madame Lulu did not answer, but merely shook her head slightly to indicate that it was not a good time to speak of such matters. Fan belt, Sunny reminded her as quietly as she could, but Madame Lulu just shook her head. You kept your promise, didn't you? Klaus murmured, scarcely above a whisper, but Madame Lulu stared ahead as if she'd not heard. He nudged his older sister inside their shared shirt. Violet, he said, scarcely daring to use her real name. Ask Madame Lulu to walk more slowly. Violet glanced briefly at Klaus and then turned her head to catch Sunny's eye. The younger Baudelaires looked back at their sister and watched her shake her head slightly, just as Madame Lulu had, and then looked down where she was holding the fortune-teller's hand. Between two of Violet's fingers, Klaus and Sunny could see the tip of a small piece of rubber, which they recognized immediately. It was the part of Madame Lulu's lightning device that resembled a fan belt, the very thing Violet needed to turn the carts of the roller coaster into an invention that could carry the Baudelaires out of the hinterlands and up into the Mortmain Mountains. But instead of feeling hopeful as they looked at this crucial item in Violet's hand, all three Baudelaires felt something quite a bit less pleasant. If you have ever experienced something that feels strangely familiar, as if the exact same thing has happened to you before, then you are experiencing what the French call déjà vu. Like most French expressions, ennui, which is a fancy term for severe boredom, or la petite mort, which describes a feeling that part of you has died, déjà vu refers to something that is usually not very pleasant, and it was not pleasant for the Baudelaire orphans to arrive at the lion pit and experience the queasy feeling of déjà vu. When the children had been staying at Heimlich Hospital, they had found themselves in an operating theater, surrounded by a large crowd that was very eager to see something violent occur, such as an operation performed on someone. When the children were living in the town of VFD, they had found themselves in a field, surrounded by a large crowd eager to see something violent occur, such as the burning of someone at the stake. And now, as Madame Lulu let go of their hands, the children looked at the enormous and strangely familiar crowd towering over them at the ruined roller coaster. Once again, there were people eager for something violent to happen. Once again, the Baudelaires were afraid for their lives. And once again, it was all because of Count Olaf. The siblings looked past the cheering crowd at the two roller coaster carts that Violet had adapted. All the invention needed was the fan belt, and the children could continue their search for one of the Baudelaire parents. But as Violet, Klaus, and Sunny looked across the pit at the two small carts joined with Ivy and altered to travel across the hinterlands, they felt the queasiness of déjà vu and wondered if there was another unhappy ending in store for them. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the most exciting afternoon of your entire lives, Count Olaf announced and cracked his whip into the pit. The whip was just long enough to strike the restless lions, who roared obediently and gnashed their teeth in hunger. These carnivorous lions are ready to eat a freak, he said, but which freak will it be? The crowd parted and the hook-handed man emerged, leading the Baudelaire's co-workers in a line toward the edge of the pit where the Baudelaires stood. Hugo, Colette, and Kevin had evidently been told to dress in their freakish clothes rather than in the gifts Esme had given them, and they gave the Baudelaires a small smile and stared nervously at the snarling lions. Once the children's co-workers had taken their places, Count Olaf's other comrades emerged from the crowd. Esme Squalor was wearing a pinstripe suit and carrying a parasol, which is a small umbrella used for keeping the sun out of one's eyes, and she smiled at the crowd and sat down on a small chair brought by Olaf's bald associate, who was also holding a long, flat piece of wood that he placed at the edge of the pit so it hung over the lions like a diving board over a swimming pool. Finally, the two white-faced women stepped forward, holding a small wooden box with a hole in the top. I'm so glad this is my last day in these clothes, Hugo murmured to the Baudelaires, gesturing to his ill-fitting coat. Just think, soon I'll be a member of Count Olaf's troop, and I'll never have to look like a freak again. Unless you're thrown to the lions, Klaus couldn't help replying. Are you kidding? Hugo whispered back. If I'm the one chosen, I'll just go throw Madame Lulu into the pit, like Esme said. Look closely at all these freaks, Count Olaf said as several people in the audience tittered. Observe Hugo's funny back. Think about how silly it is that Colette can bend herself into all sorts of strange positions. Giggle at the absurdity of Kevin's ambidextrous arms and legs. Snicker at Beverly and Elliot, the two-headed freak, and laugh so hard you could scarcely breathe at Chabo, the wolf baby. The crowd erupted into laughter, pointing and laughing at the people they thought were the funniest. Look at Chabo's ridiculous teeth, cried a woman who had dyed her hair several colors at once. She looks positively idiotic. I think Kevin is funnier, replied her husband, who had dyed his hair to match. I hope he's thrown into the pit. It'll be fun to see him try to defend himself with both hands and feet. I hope it's the hook-handed freak, said a woman standing in the back of the Baudelaires. That will make it even more violent. I'm not a freak, the hook-handed man snarled impatiently. I'm an employee of Count Olaf's. Oh, sorry, the woman replied. In that case, I hope it's that man with the pimples in on his chin. I'm a member of the audience, the man cried. I'm not a freak, I just have some skin problems. Then what about that woman in the silly suit, she asked, or the guy with the one eyebrow? I'm Count Olaf's girlfriend, Esme said, and my suit is in, not silly. I don't care who's a freak and who isn't, said someone else in the crowd. I just want to see the lions eat somebody. You will, Count Olaf promised. We're going to have the choosing ceremony right now. The names of all the freaks have been written down on small scraps of paper and placed in the box that these two lovely ladies are holding. The two white-faced women held up the wooden box and curtsied to the audience, while Esme frowned at them. I don't think they're particularly lovely, she said, but few people heard her over the cheering of the crowd. I'm going to reach inside the box, Count Olaf said. Draw out one piece of paper and read the name of the freak out loud. Then that freak will walk down that wooden plank and jump into the pit and will watch as the lions eat him. Or her, Esme said, and looked over at Madame Lulu and then at the Baudelaires and their co-workers. Putting down her parasol for a moment, she raised both of her long-nailed hands and made a small pushing motion to remind them of her scheme. Or her, Count Olaf said, looking curiously at Esme's gesture. Now, are there any questions before we begin? Why do you get to choose the name? Asked the pimpled man. Because this whole thing was my idea, Count Olaf said. I have a question, asked the woman with dyed hair. Is this legal? Oh, stop spoiling the fun, her husband said. You wanted to come and watch people get eaten by lions, so I brought you. If you're going to ask a bunch of complicated questions, you can go wait in the car. Please continue your countship, said the reporter from the Daily Punctilio. I will, Count Olaf said, and whipped the lions one more time before reaching into the wooden box. Giving the children and their co-workers a cruel smile, he moved his hand around inside the box for quite some time, before at last drawing out a small piece of paper that had been folded many times. The crowd leaned forward to watch, and the Baudelaires strained to see over the heads of the adults around them. But Count Olaf did not unfold the piece of paper immediately. Instead, he held it up as high as he could and gave the audience a large smile. I'm going to open this piece of paper very slowly, he announced, to increase the suspense. How clever, the reporter said, snapping her gum in excitement. I can see the headline now. Count Olaf increases suspense. I learned how to amaze crowds by working extensively as a famous actor, Count Olaf said, smiling at the reporter and still holding up the piece of paper. Be sure to write that down. I will, the reporter said breathlessly and held her microphone closer to Olaf's mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, Count Olaf cried, I am now unfolding the first fold in the piece of paper. Oh boy, cried several members of the audience. Hooray for the first fold! There are only 5 folds left, Olaf said. Only 5 more folds, and we will know which freak will be thrown to the lions. This is so exciting, cried the man with dyed hair. I might faint. Just don't fade into the pit, his wife said. I am now unfolding the second fold in the piece of paper, Count Olaf announced. Now there are only 4 folds left. The lions roared impatiently, as if they were tired of all this nonsense with the piece of paper, but the audience cheered for the increased suspense and paid no attention to the beasts in the pit, gazing only at Count Olaf, who smiled and blew kisses to the carnival visitors. The Baudelaires, however, were no longer looking over the heads of the crowd to watch Olaf do his shtick, a phrase which here means increased suspense by slowly unfolding a piece of paper printed with the name of someone who was supposed to jump into the pit of lions. They were taking advantage of the fact that no one was watching them and stepped as close as they could to one another so they could talk without being overheard. "Do you think that we should sneak around the pit to the roller coaster carts?" Klaus murmured to his sister. "I think it's too crowded," Violet replied. "Do you think we could get the lions to not eat anyone?" "I think they're too hungry," Klaus said, squinting down at the growling beasts. "I read a book about large feline animals that said if they're hungry enough, they'll eat practically anything." "Is there anything else you've read about lions that could help us?" Violet asked. "I don't think so," Klaus replied. "Is there anything else you can invent from that fan belt that can help us?" "I don't think so," Violet replied, her voice faint with fear. "Déjà vu," Sunny called up to her siblings. She meant something along the lines of, "We must be able to think of something that can help us. We've escaped from bloodthirsty crowds before." "Sunny's right," Klaus said. "When we lived at Heimlich Hospital, we learned about stalling a crowd when we postponed Olaf's scheme to operate on you. And when we lived at the village of Foul Devotees, Violet said we learned about mob psychology when we watched all the villagers get so upset they couldn't think clearly. But what can we do with this crowd? What can we do now?" "Both," Sunny murmured, and then growled quickly in case anyone was listening. "I unfolded the paper again," Count Olaf crowed, and I probably do not have to tell you that he explained that there were only 3 folds left, or that the crowd cheered once more, as if he'd done something very brave or very noble. I probably do not have to tell you that he announced the remaining 3 folds as if they were very exciting events, and that the crowd cheered him each time, eagerly awaiting the violence and sloppy eating that would follow. And I probably don't even have to tell you what was written on that piece of paper, because if you have read this far in this wretched book, then you are well acquainted with the Baudelaire orphans, and you know what kind of freakish luck they have. A person with normal luck would arrive at a carnival in comfortable circumstances, such as a double-decker bus or on the back of an elephant, and would probably have a pleasant time enjoying all of the things that a carnival has to offer, and would feel happy and content at the end of their stay. But the Baudelaires had arrived at Caligari Carnival in the trunk of an automobile, and had been forced to put themselves in uncomfortable disguises, take part in a humiliating show, and place themselves in dangerous circumstances, and as their freakish luck would have it, had not even found the information they were hoping to discover. So it probably will not be a surprise to you to learn that Hugo's name was not printed on the piece of paper in Count Olaf's hand, or Colette's name, or the name of Kevin, who was clasping his equally skilled hands together in nervousness as Olaf finally unfolded the paper completely. It will not surprise you that when Count Olaf announced what the paper said, the eyes of the entire crowd fell on the disguised children. But although you might not be surprised at Count Olaf's announcement, you might be surprised at the announcement that one of the siblings made immediately afterward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Count Olaf announced, "Beverly and Elliot, the 2-headed freak, will be thrown to the lions today." "Ladies and gentlemen," Violet Baudelaire announced, "we are thrilled to be chosen." And that's the end of chapter 10. And I will catch up. Thank you, Riddy, for whatever that was. Let me go back to where I stopped reading. It's taking a bow. A bow. Yeah, I read bow as bow for some reason. Well done, Twix, yeah. Oh, I have to go soon? Aw. Well, when you do go, I hope that you have a great day, and thank you for being here. And goodness, thank you so much for that resub. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the shout outs. The suspense. Fold hype. I'm at Sonic in the car. Be safe, Paige, and hello. I don't know what that is yet. Hang on. Tots. I love tater tots. Olaf, king of suspense. Be safe driving. Why are you reading some poem? Well, considering that this is a book, and I did not write it. This is my favorite Lemony Snicket book. Well, I'm glad you're here. Oh my gosh, thank you for the resub, Moocher. I appreciate that. You're welcome, bestie Bose. I'm just kidding. Do you know the deja vu joke? I don't know, do I? Or was that the punchline? I think I've heard it before. Ha! I get it. And mods, if you'll just keep an eye out on that, follow, please. Alright, we have 3 more chapters, and then the book is over. 11, 12, and 13. And these chapters, I think, are slightly smaller, slightly shorter than the ones before it. So, we only have, like, 50 pages left. Okay, moving along. And my nose is really itchy for some reason, and as I talk, it, like, makes it itchier. And so, like, I know I keep scratching my nose, but it's just because, like, it's just getting itchy. Okay. Chapter 11. There is another writer I know, who, like myself, is thought by a great deal of people to be dead. His name is William Shakespeare, and he has written 4 kinds of plays: comedies, romances, histories, and tragedies. Comedies, of course, are stories in which people tell jokes and trip over things, and romances are stories in which people fall in love and probably get married. Histories are retellings of things that actually happened, like my history of the Baudelaire orphans, and tragedies are stories that usually begin fairly happily and then steadily go downhill until all of the characters are dead, wounded, or otherwise inconvenienced. It is usually not much fun to watch a tragedy. Whether you are in the audience or one of the characters, and out of all Shakespeare's tragedies, possibly the least fun example is King Lear, which tells the story of a king who goes mad while his daughters plot to murder one another and other people who are getting on their nerves. Toward the end of the play, one of William Shakespeare's characters remarks that humanity must perforce prey upon itself, like monsters of the deep. A sentence which here means how sad it is that people end up hurting one another as if they were ferocious sea monsters. And when the character utters those unhappy words, the people in Shakespeare's audience often weep or sigh or remind themselves to see a comedy next time. I am sorry to report that the story of the Baudelaire orphans has reached a point where it is appropriate to borrow Mr. Shakespeare's rather depressing sentence to describe how the Baudelaire orphans felt as they addressed the crowd gathered at the edge of the lion pit and tried to continue the story they found themselves in without turning it into a tragedy, when it seemed that everyone was eager to hurt one another. Count Olaf and his henchmen were eager to see Violet and Klaus jump to their carnivorous deaths, so that Caligari Carnival would become more popular, and Madame Lulu would continue telling Olaf's fortune. Esme Squalor was eager to see Madame Lulu thrown into the pit, so that she could get all of Olaf's attention, and the Baudelaire's co-workers were eager to help so they could join Olaf's troupe. The reporter from the Daily Punctilio and the other members of the audience were eager to see violence and sloppy eating, so their visit to the carnival would be worthwhile. And the lions were eager for a meal after being whipped and denied food for so long. It seemed that every member of humanity gathered at the roller coaster that afternoon was eager for something awful to occur, And the children felt awful as Violet and Klaus stepped toward the plank and pretended they were just as eager. "Thank you, Count Olaf, for choosing my other head and eye as the first victims in the lion show," Klaus said grandly in his high-pitched voice. You're welcome," Count Olaf replied, looking a bit surprised. "Now jump into the pit so we could watch the lions devour you." "And do it quickly," cried the man with pimples on his chin. "I'd like my carnival visit to be worthwhile." "Instead of watching a freak jump into the pit," Violet said, quickly thinking, "wouldn't you rather watch someone push a freak into the pit? That'd be much more violent." "Grrr," Sunny growled in disguised agreement. "That's a good point," one of the white-faced women said thoughtfully. "Oh, yes!" cried the woman with dyed hair. "I want to see the two-headed freak thrown to the lions." "I agree," Esme said, glaring at the two older Baudelaires and then at Madame Lulu. "I'd like to see someone thrown into the pit." The crowd cheered and applauded, and Sunny watched as her two siblings took a step toward the plank that was hung over the pit where the lions were waiting hungrily. There are tiresome people who say that if you ever find yourself in a difficult situation, you should stop and figure out the right thing to do. But the three siblings already knew that the right thing to do was to dash over to the roller coaster carts, hook up the fan belt, and escape into the hinterlands with Madame Lulu and her archival library, after calmly explaining to the gathered crowd that bloodshed was not a proper form of entertainment, and that Count Olaf and his troupe ought to be arrested that very instant. But there are times in this harem-scarum world when figuring out the right thing to do is quite simple, but doing the right thing is simply impossible, and then you must do something else. The three Baudelaires, standing in their disguises in the midst of a crowd eager for violence and sloppy eating, knew that they could not do the right thing, but they thought they could try to get the crowd as frantic as possible so they might slip away in the confusion. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny weren't sure if using the techniques of stalling and mob psychology was the right thing to do, but the Baudelaire orphans could not think of anything else, and whether or not it was the right thing to do, their plan did seem to be working. "This is absolutely thrilling," exclaimed the reporter excitedly. "I can see the headline now. Freaks pushed into lion pit. Wait until the readers of the Daily Punctilio see that." Sunny made the loudest growl she could, and pointed one of her tiny fingers at Count Olaf. "What Chabot is trying to convey in her half-wolf language," Klaus said, "is that Count Olaf ought to be the one to push us into the pit. After all, the lion show was his idea." "That's true," the pimpled man said. "Let's see Olaf throw Beverly and Elliot into the pit." Count Olaf scowled at the Baudelaires, and then gave the crowd a smile that showed quite a few of his filthy teeth. "I am deeply honored to be asked," he said, bowing slightly, "but I'm afraid it would not be appropriate at this time." "Why not?" demanded the woman with dyed hair. Count Olaf paused for a moment, and then made a short, high-pitched sound as disguised as Sunny's growl. "Achoo! I'm allergic to cats," he explained. "See, I'm sneezing already, and I'm not even on the plank." "Your allergies didn't bother you when you were whipping the lions," Violet said. "That's true," the hook-handed man said. "I didn't even know you had allergies, Olaf." Count Olaf glared at his henchman. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, but the crowd didn't want to hear another one of the villain's speeches. "Push the freak in, Olaf!" someone shouted, and everyone cheered. Count Olaf frowned, but grabbed Klaus's hand and led the two eldest Baudelaires onto the plank. But as the crowd roared around them and the lions roared beneath them, the Baudelaires could see that Count Olaf was no more eager to get any closer to the hungry lions than they were. "Throwing people into pits isn't really my job," Count Olaf said nervously to the crowd. "I'm more of an actor." "I have an idea," Esme said suddenly in a false sweet voice. "Madame Lulu, why don't you walk down that plank and throw your freak into their death?" "This is not really my job either, please," Madame Lulu protested, looking at the children nervously. "I am fortune teller, not freak thrower." "Don't be so modest, Madame Lulu," Count Olaf said with a nasty smile. "Even though the lion show was my idea, you're the most important person here at the carnival. Take my place on the plank so we can see someone get pushed to their death." "What a nice offer," the reporter cried. "You're a very generous person, Count Olaf." "Let's see Madame Lulu throw Beverly and Elliot into the pit," cried the pimpled man, and everyone cheered again. As mob psychology began to take hold, the crowd seemed to be as flexible as it was excited, and they gave the fortune teller an enormous round of applause as she nervously took Count Olaf's place on the plank. The piece of wood teetered for a moment from the weight of so many people standing on it, and the older Baudelaires had to struggle to keep their balance. The crowd gasped in excitement and then groaned as the two disguised children managed not to fall. "This is so exciting!" squealed the reporter. "Maybe Lulu will fall in too." "Yes," Esme snarled. "Maybe she will." "I don't care who falls in," announced the pimpled man. Frustrated by the delay and violence and sloppy eating, he tossed his cold beverage into the pit and splashed several lions, who roared in annoyance. "To me, a woman in a turban is just as freaky as a two-headed person. I'm not prejudiced." "Me neither," agreed someone who was wearing a hat with the words Caligari Carnival printed on it. "I'm just eager for this show to finally get started. I hope Madame Lulu is brave enough to push that freak in." "It doesn't matter if she's brave enough," the bald man replied with a chuckle. "Everyone will do what they're expected to do. What other choice do they have?" Violet and Klaus had reached the end of the plank, and they tried as hard as they could to think of an answer to the bald man's question. Below them was a roaring mass of hungry lions who had gathered so closely together below the wooden board that they just seemed to be a mass of waving claws and open mouths, and around them was a roaring crowd of people who were watching them with eager smiles on their faces. The Baudelaires had succeeded in getting the crowd more and more frantic, but they still hadn't found an opportunity to slip away in the confusion, and now it seemed like that opportunity would never knock. With difficulty, Violet turned her head to face her brother, and Klaus squinted at her, and Sunny could see that her sibling's eyes were filled with tears. "Her luck may have run out," she said. "Stop whispering to your heads," Count Olaf ordered in a terrible voice. "Madame Lulu, push them this instant." "We're increasing the suspense!" Klaus cried back desperately. "The suspense has been increased enough," replied the man with the pimpled chin impatiently. "I'm getting tired of all this stalling." "Me too!" cried the woman with dyed hair. "Me too!" cried someone else standing nearby. "Olaf, hit Lulu with the whip. That'll get her to stop stalling." "Just a moment, please," Madame Lulu said, and took another step toward Violet and Klaus. The plank teetered again, and the lions roared, hoping that their lunch was about to arrive. Madame Lulu looked at the elder Baudelaires frantically, and the children saw her shoulders shrug slightly underneath her shimmering robe. "Enough of this," the hook-handed man said, and stepped forward impatiently. "I'll throw them in myself. I guess I'm the only one brave enough to do it." "Oh no," Hugo said. I'm brave enough too, and so are Colette and Kevin." "Freaks who are brave?" the hook-handed man sneered. "Don't be ridiculous." "We are brave," Hugo insisted. "Count Olaf, let us prove it to you, and then you can employ us." "Employ you?" Count Olaf asked with a frown. "What a wonderful idea!" Esme exclaimed, as if the idea had not been hers. "Yes," Colette said. "We'd like to find something else to do, and this seems like a wonderful opportunity." Kevin stepped forward and held out both his hands. "I know, I'm a freak," he said to Olaf, "but I think I could be just as useful as the hook-handed man, or your bald associate." "What?" the bald man snapped. "A freak like you as useful as me? Don't be ridiculous." "I can be useful," Kevin insisted. "You just watch." "Stop all this bickering," the pimpled man said crankily. "I didn't visit this carnival to hear people argue about their work problems."
"You're distracting me in my other head,"
Violet said in her low, disguised voice.
"Let's get off this plank. We could discuss all this matter calmly."
"I don't want to discuss things calmly," cried the woman with dyed hair. "I can do that at home." "Yes," agreed the reporter from the Daily Punctilio. "People discuss things calmly is a boring headline. Somebody throws somebody else into the lion pit and we'll all get what we want." "Madame Lulu will do it, please," Madame Lulu announced in a booming voice, and grabbed Violet and Klaus by the shirt. The Baudelaires looked up at her and saw a tear appear in one of her eyes, and she leaned down to speak to them. "I'm sorry, Baudelaires," she murmured quietly without a trace of accent, and reached down to Violet's hand and took the fan belt away from her. Sunny was so upset she forgot to growl. "Transith!" she shrieked, which meant something along the lines of, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself." But if the fake fortune teller was ashamed of herself, she did not behave accordingly. "Madame Lulu always says you must always give people what they want," she said grandly in her disguised voice. "She will do the throwing, please, and she will do it now." "Don't be ridiculous," Hugo said, stepping forward eagerly. "I'll do it." "You're the one being ridiculous," Colette said, contorting her body toward Lulu.
I'll do it. No, I'll do it, Kevin cried with both hands. I'll do it, the bald man cried, blocking Kevin's way. I don't want a freak like you for a coworker.
I'll do it, cried the hook-handed man. I'll do it, cried one of the white-faced women. I'll do it, cried the other one. I'll get someone else to do it, cried Esme Squalor. Count Olaf unwound his whip and flicked it over the heads of the crowd with a mighty snap that made everyone cower, a word which here means cringe and duck and hope not to get whipped. Silence, he commanded in a terrible roar. All of you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. You're arguing like a bunch of children. I want to see those lions devouring someone this very instant, and whoever has the courage to carry out my orders will get a special reward. This speech, of course, was just the latest example of Count Olaf's tedious philosophy concerning a stubborn mule moving in the proper direction if there is a carrot dangling in front of it. But the offer of a special reward finally got the crowd as frantic as possible. In a moment, the crowd of carnival visitors had become a mob of volunteers, all of whom swarmed eagerly forward to finally throw someone to the lions. Hugo lunged forward to push Madame Lulu, but bumped into the box that the white-faced women were holding, and the three of them fell in a heap at the edge of the pit. The hook-handed man lunged forward to grab Violet and Klaus, but his hook caught in the cord of the reporter's microphone and became hopelessly entangled. Colette contorted her arms so as to grab Lulu's ankles, but grabbed Esme Squalor's ankle by accident and got her hands all twisted around one of Esme's fashionable shoes. The woman with dyed hair decided she might give it a try and leaned forward to push the elder Baudelaires, but they stepped to the side and the woman fell into her husband, who accidentally slapped the man with pimples on his chin, and the three carnival visitors began arguing loudly. Quite a few people who were standing nearby decided to get in on the argument and gathered around to shout in each other's faces. Within moments of Count Olaf's announcement, the Baudelaires were in the middle of a furious mass of humanity, who were standing over the children, yelling and pushing and preying on themselves like monsters of the deep, while the lions roared furiously in the pit below. But then the siblings heard another sound in the pit, a horrible crunching and ripping sound that was far worse than the roaring of beasts. The crowd stopped arguing to see what was making the noise, but the Baudelaires were not interested in seeing anything more, and stepped back from the terrible sound and huddled against one another with their eyes shut as tightly as possible. Even in this position, however, the children could see the terrible, terrible sounds from the pit, even over the laughter and cheers of the carnival visitors as they crowded together at the edge of the pit to see what was happening. And so the three youngsters turned away from the commotion, and with their eyes still closed, slipped away in the confusion, stumbling through all of the cheering people until at last they were in the clear, a phrase which here means far enough away from the roller coaster that they could no longer see or hear what was going on. But the Baudelaire orphans, of course, could still imagine what was happening, and I can imagine it, even though I was not there that afternoon, and I have only read descriptions of what occurred down in the pit. The article in the Daily Punctilio says that it was Madame Lulu who fell first, but newspaper articles are often inaccurate, so it is impossible to say if this is actually true. Perhaps she did fall first, and the bald man fell after her, or perhaps Lulu managed to push the bald man in as she tried to escape his grasp, only to slip and join him in the pit just moments later. Or perhaps these two people were still struggling when the plank teetered one more time, and the lions reached both of them at the same time. It is likely that I will never know, just as I will probably never know the location of the fan belt, no matter how many times I return to Caligari Carnival to search for it. At first I thought that Madame Lulu dropped the strip of rubber on the ground near the pit, but I have searched the entire area with a shovel and a flashlight and found no sign of it, and none of the carnival visitors whose houses I have searched seem to have taken it home for a souvenir. Then I thought that perhaps the fan belt was thrown into the air during all the commotion, and perhaps landed up in the tracks of the roller coaster, but I have climbed over every inch without success. And there is, of course, the possibility that it has burned away, but lightning devices are generally made of a certain type of rubber that is difficult to burn, so that possibility seems remote. And so I must admit that I do not know for certain where the fan belt is, and like knowing whether it was the bald man or Madame Lulu who fell first, that this may be information that will never come to me. But I can imagine that the small strip of rubber ended up in the same place as the woman who removed it from the lightning device and gave it to the Baudelaire orphans, only to snatch it back at the last minute, and in the same place as the associate of Olaf's who was so eager to get a special reward. If I close my eyes, as the Baudelaire orphans closed their eyes when they stumbled away from this unfortunate incident, I can imagine that the fan belt, like the bald man and my former associate Olivia, fell into the pit that Olaf and his henchmen had dug and ended up in the belly of the beast. That's the end of chapter 11. Riddy has those cat-like reflexes, so she's probably going to take care of things before we can even see it. That's true. These people are so sick. Yeah. Lions are hungry. She could give people cake. She will do it, please. Cake. Hugo lunched forward. Better than lunching backwards. Bald man is no more. Neither is Madame Lulu. Olivia really was from the books. I never caught that before. That's true. Hi, Susan! I hope you're doing well today. I think it's kind of early for you, but I hope you're having a good morning. All right, 2 more chapters and then we're done. Chapter 12. When the Baudelaire orphans finally opened their eyes, they found that they had stumbled to the entrance of Madame Lulu's fortune-telling tent, with the initials VFD still staring out at them. Most of the carnival visitors had walked over to the lion pit to see the show, so the siblings were alone in the fading afternoon, and once again there was no one watching them as they stood in front of the tent, trembling and crying quietly. The last time they had stood for so long at the tent's entrance, the decoration had seemed to change before their very eyes until they saw that it was not a painting of an eye, but the insignia of an organization that might help them. Now they stood and stared again, hoping that something would change before their very eyes until they saw what it was that they could do. But nothing seemed to change, no matter how hard they looked. The carnival remained silent, and the afternoon continued to creep toward evening, and the insignia on the tent simply stared back at the weeping Baudelaires. "I wonder where the fan belt is," Violet said finally. Her voice was faint and almost hoarse, but her tears had stopped at last. "I wonder if it fell to the ground or was thrown onto the tracks of the roller coaster, or if it ended up—" "How can you think about a fan belt at a time like this?" Klaus asked, although his voice was not angry. Like his sister, he was still trembling inside the shirt they shared, and felt very tired, as is often the case after a long cry. "I don't want to think about anything else," Violet said. "I don't want to think about Madame Lulu and the lions, and I don't want to think about Count Olaf and the crowd, and I don't want to think about whether or not we did the right thing." "Right," Sunny said gently. "I agree," Klaus said. "We did the best we could." "I'm not so sure," Violet replied. "I had the fan belt in my hand. It was all we needed to finish the invention and escape from this awful place." "You couldn't finish the invention," Klaus said. "We were surrounded by a crowd of people who wanted to see someone thrown to the lions, and it's not our fault that she fell in instead." "And bald," Sunny added. "But we made the crowd even more frantic," Violet said. "We stalled the show, and then we used mob psychology to get them excited about throwing somebody into the pit." "Count Olaf is the one who thought up this whole ghastly scheme," Klaus said. "What happened to Madame Lulu is his fault, not ours." "We promised to take her with us," Violet insisted. "Madame Lulu kept her promise and did not tell Count Olaf who we were, but we did not keep ours. We tried. Klaus said. We tried to keep ours. But trying's not good enough, Violet said. Are we going to try to find one of our parents? Are we going to try to defeat Count Olaf? Yes, Sunny said firmly and wrapped her arms around Violet's leg. The eldest Baudelaire looked down at her sister and her eyes filled up with tears. Why are we here? She asked. We thought we could put on disguises and get ourselves out of trouble, but we're worse off than when we began. We don't know what VFD stands for, we don't know where the Snicket file is, and we don't know if one of our parents is really alive. There are some things we might not know, Klaus said, but that doesn't mean we should give up. We can find out what we need to know. We can find out anything. Violet smiled through her tears. You sound like a researcher, she said. The middle Baudelaire reached into his pocket and pulled out his glasses. I am a researcher, he said, and stepped toward the entrance to the tent. Let's get to work. Ged, Sunny said, which meant something like, I almost forgot about the archival library, and she followed her siblings through the flap in the tent. As soon as the Baudelaire orphans stepped inside, they saw that Madame Lulu had made quite a few preparations for her escape with the children, and it made them very sad to think that she would never return to the fortune-telling tent to collect the things that she had waiting for her. Her disguise kit was all packed up again and waiting by the door so she could take it with her. There was a cardboard box standing next to the cupboard filled with food that could be eaten on the journey. And laid out on the table next to Madame Lulu's replacement crystal ball and various parts of the lightning device she had dismantled was a large piece of paper that was badly torn and looked very old, but the Baudelaires saw at once that it could help them. It's a map, Violet said. It's a map of the Mortmain Mountains. She must have had it among her papers. Klaus put his glasses on and peered at it closely. Those mountains must be very cold this time of year, he said. I didn't realize the altitude was so high. Never mind the altitude, Violet said. Can you find the headquarters Lulu was talking about? Let's see, Klaus said. There's a star next to Plath Pass, but the key says that a star indicates a campground. Key? Sunny asked. The chart in the corner of the map is called a key, Klaus explained. You see, the map maker explains what each symbol means so the map doesn't get too cluttered. There's a black rectangle there over in the Richter Range, she said. See over in the east? A black rectangle indicates a hibernation ground, Klaus said. There must be quite a few bears in the Mortmain Mountains. Look, there's 5 hibernation grounds near Silent Springs, and a large cluster of them at the top of Paucity Peak. And here, Violet said, is the Valley of 4 Drafts, where it looks like Madame Lulu spilled coffee. Valley of 4 Drafts? Klaus said. VFD, Sunny cried. The Baudelaires peered together at the spot on the map. The Valley of 4 Drafts was high up in the Mortmain Mountains where it would be very cold. The stricken stream began there and wound its way down to the sea in sagging curves through the hinterlands, and the map showed many, many hibernation grounds along the way. There was a small brown stain in the center of the valley where 4 gaps in the mountains came together and where Lulu had probably spilled coffee, but there were no markings for a headquarters or for anything else. Do you think it means something? Violet asked. Or is it just a coincidence like all the VFDs we've come across? I thought the V in VFD stood for volunteer, Klaus said. That's what we found written on the page of the Quagmire notebooks, and it's what Jacques Snicket said. Winnow? Sunny said, which meant, but where else could the headquarters be? There's no other marking on the map. Well, if VFD is a secret organization, Violet said, they might not put their headquarters on a map. Or it could be marked secretly, Klaus said, and leaned in to take a good look at the stain. Maybe this isn't just a stain, he said. Maybe it's a secret marking. Maybe Madame Lulu put some coffee here on purpose so she could find the headquarters, but nobody else could. I guess we'll have to travel there, Violet said with a sigh, and find out. How are we going to travel there? Klaus said. We don't know where the fan belt is. We might be missing some parts, Violet replied, but that doesn't mean we should give up. I could build something else. You sound like an inventor, he said. Violet smiled and took her hair ribbon out of her pocket. I am an inventor, she said. I'll look around here and see if there's anything else we can use. Klaus, you look under the table at the archival library. We'd better get out of the clothes we're sharing, Klaus said, or we can't do 2 things at once. In greedy, Sunny said, which meant, meanwhile, I'll look through all this food and make sure we have everything we need to prepare meals. Good idea, Violet said. We'd better hurry before someone finds us. There you are. Oh. There you are, cried a voice from the entrance to the tent, and the Baudelaires jumped. Violet hurriedly stuffed her ribbon back into her pocket, and Klaus removed his glasses so they could turn around without revealing their disguise. Count Olaf and Esme Squalor were standing together in the doorway of the tent, with their arms around one another, looking tired but happy, as if they were two parents coming home after a long day at work, instead of a vicious villain and his scheming girlfriend coming into a fortune-teller's tent after an afternoon of violence. Esme Squalor was clutching a small bouquet of ivy her boyfriend had apparently given her, and Count Olaf was holding a flaming torch, which was shining as brightly as his wicked eyes. "I've been looking everywhere for you two," he said. "What are you doing in here?" "We decided to let all of you freaks join us," Esme said, "even though you weren't very courageous at the lion's pit."
"That's very kind of you to offer," Violet said quickly, "but you don't want cowards like us in your troop."
"Sure we do," Count Olaf said with a nasty smile. "We keep losing assistants, and it's always good to have a few to spare. I even asked the woman who runs the gift caravan to join us, but she was too worried about her precious figurines to know that opportunity was knocking." "Besides," Esme said, stroking Olaf's hair, "you don't really have any choice. We're going to burn this carnival down to eliminate all the evidence that we've been here. Most of the tents are already on fire, and the carnival visitors and carnival workers are running for their lives. If you don't join us, where could you possibly go?" The Baudelaires looked at one another in dismay. "I guess you're right," Klaus said. "Of course we're right," Esme said. "Now get out of here and help us pack up the trunk." "Wait a minute," Count Olaf said, and strode over to the table. "What's this?" he demanded. "It looks like a map." "It is a map," Klaus admitted with a sigh, wishing he'd hidden it in his pockets. "A map of the Mortmain Mountains." "The Mortmain Mountains!" Count Olaf said, examining the map eagerly. "That's where we're heading. Lulu said that if there was a parent alive, they'd be headed up there. Does this map show any headquarters on it?" "I think these black rectangles indicate headquarters," Esme said, peering over Olaf's shoulder. "I'm pretty good at reading maps." "No, they represent campgrounds," Olaf said, looking at the key, but then his face broke out into a smile. "Wait a minute," he said, and pointed to the stain the Baudelaires had been examining. "I haven't seen one of these in a very long time," he said, stroking his scraggly chin. "A small brown stain?" Esme asked. "You saw that this morning." "This is a coded stain," Count Olaf explained. "I was taught to use this on maps when I was a little boy. It's to mark a secret location without anyone else noticing." "Except a smashing genius," Esme said. "I guess we're headed for the Valley of Four Drafts." "VFD," Count Olaf said and giggled. "That's appropriate. Well, let's go. Is there anything else useful in here?" The Baudelaires looked quickly at the table where the archival library was hidden. Underneath the black tablecloth decorated with silver stars was all the crucial information Madame Lulu had gathered to give her visitors what they wanted. The children knew that all sorts of important secrets could be found in the gathering of paper, and they shuddered to think what Count Olaf would do if he discovered all those secrets. "No," Klaus said finally. "Nothing else useful." Count Olaf frowned and kneeled down so his face was right next to Klaus's. Even without his glasses, the middle Baudelaire could see that Olaf had not washed his one eyebrow for quite some time, and could smell his breath as he spoke. "I think you're lying to me," the villain said, and waved the lit torch in Klaus's face.
"My other head is telling the truth,"
Violet said. "Then what is that food doing there?" Count Olaf demanded, pointing at the cardboard box. "Don't you think food would be useful for a long journey?" The Baudelaire sighed in relief. "Grrr," Sunny growled. "Chabo compliments you on your cleverness," Klaus said, "and so do we. We hadn't even noticed the box." "That's why I'm the boss," Count Olaf said, "because I'm smart and I have good eyesight." He laughed nastily and put the torch in Klaus's hand. "Now then," he said, "I want you to light this tent on fire and then bring the box of food over to the car. Chabo, come with me. I'm sure I'll find something for you to sink your teeth into." "Grrr," Sunny said doubtfully.
"Chabo would prefer to stay with us,"
Violet said. "I couldn't care less what Chabo would prefer," Olaf snarled and picked up the youngest Baudelaire as if she were a watermelon. "Now get busy." Count Olaf and Esme Squalor walked out of the tent with Chabo, leaving the elder Baudelaires alone with the flaming torch. "We'd better pick up the box first," Klaus said, "and light the tent from the outside. Otherwise we'll be surrounded by flames in no time." "Are we really going to follow Olaf's orders?" Violet said, looking at the table again. "The archival library might have all the answers to our questions." "I don't think we have a choice," Klaus said. Olaf's burning down the whole carnival, and riding with him is our only chance to get to the Mortmain Mountains. You don't have time to invent something, and I don't have time to look through the library. We could find one of the other carnival employees, Violet said, and ask them if they'd help us. Everyone thinks we're either freaks or murderers, Klaus said. Even sometimes I think so. If we join Count Olaf, Violet said, we might become even more freakish and murderous. But if we don't join him, Klaus asked, where could we possibly go? I don't know, Violet said sadly, but this can't be the right thing to do, can it? Maybe it's harem scarum, Klaus said, like Olivia said. Maybe it is, Violet said, and walked awkwardly with her brother to the cardboard box and picked it up. Klaus held the torch, and the two Baudelaires walked out of the fortune-telling tent for the last time. When they first stepped out, still wearing the same pair of pants, it seemed as if night had already fallen, though the air was black and not blue of the famous hinterland sunsets. But then Violet and Klaus realized that the air was filling with smoke. Looking around, they saw that many of the tents and caravans were already on fire, as Count Olaf had said, and the flames were billowing black smoke up into the sky. Around them, the last of the carnival visitors were rushing to escape from Olaf's treachery, and in the distance, the siblings could hear the panicked roars of the lions who were still trapped in the pit. "This isn't the kind of violence I like!" shouted the man with pimples on his face, coughing in the smoke as he ran by. "I prefer it when other people are in danger!" "Me too," said the report from the Daily Punctilio, running alongside him. "Olaf told me that the Baudelaires are responsible. I can see the headline now, 'Baudelaires continue their lives of crime.'" "What kind of children would do such a terrible thing?" asked the man with the pimpled chin, but Violet and Klaus could not hear the answer over the voice of Count Olaf. "Hurry up, you two-headed freak," he called from the corner. "If you don't come here right this minute, we're leaving without you." "Grrr," Sunny growled frantically, and at the sound of their baby sister's disguised voice, the older Baudelaires threw the lit torch onto the fortune-telling tent and ran toward Olaf's voice without looking back, although it wouldn't have mattered if they had looked. There was so much fire and smoke around them, one more burning tent would not have made the carnival look any different. The only difference was that they would have known that part of the fire was of their own devising, a phrase which here means because of their part in Count Olaf's treachery. And although neither Violet nor Klaus saw this with their own eyes, they knew it in their hearts, and I doubt that they would ever forget it. When the older Baudelaires rounded the corner, they saw all of Olaf's other henchmen were already waiting at the long black automobile which was parked in front of the freak's caravan. Hugo, Colette, and Kevin were crowded in the back seat with the two white-faced women, while Esme Squalor sat in the front with Sunny on her lap. The hunk-headed man took the box out of the older Baudelaire's hands and threw it into the trunk, while Count Olaf pointed to the caravan with his whip, which looked much shorter and rough around the edges. "You two will ride in that," he said. "We're going to attach it to the automobile and pull you along with us."
"Isn't there room in the car?"
Violet asked nervously. "Don't be ridiculous," the hook-handed man said with a sneer. "It's too crowded. Good thing Colette's a contortionist so she can curl into a ball at our feet." "Chabo already gnawed my whip down so it could be used as a connecting rope," Count Olaf said. "I'll just tie the caravan to the car with a double slip knot and then we'll ride off into the sunset."
"Excuse me," Violet said, "but I know a knot called the Devil's Tongue that I think will hold better."
"And if I remember the map correctly," Klaus said, "we should ride east until we find the stricken stream, so we should drive that way, away from the sunset." Yes, Count Olaf said quickly. "That's what I meant. Tie it yourself if you want. I'll go start the engine." Olaf tossed the rope to Klaus while the hook-handed man reached into the trunk again and brought out a pair of walkie-talkies the children remembered from when they were living in Count Olaf's home. "Take one of these," he said, putting one in Violet's hand, "so we can contact you if we need to tell you something." "Hurry up!" Count Olaf snapped, taking the other walkie-talkie. "The air's filling with smoke." The villain and his henchmen got into the automobile, and Violet and Klaus knelt down to attach the caravan. "I can't believe I'm using this knot to help Count Olaf," she said. "It feels like I'm using my inventing skills to participate in something wicked." "We're all participating," Klaus said glumly. "Sunny used her teeth to turn that whip into a connecting rope, and I just used my map skills to tell Olaf which direction to head." "At least we'll get there too," Violet said, "and maybe one of our parents will be waiting for us there. The knot's tied. Let's get in the caravan." "I wish we were riding with Sunny," Klaus said. "We are," Violet said. "We're not getting to the Mortmain Mountains the way we want, but we're getting there, and that's what counts." I hope so, Klaus said, and he and his sister stepped into the Freak's caravan and shut the door. Count Olaf started the engine of the car, and the caravan began to rock gently back and forth as the automobile pulled them away from the carnival. The hammock swayed above the two siblings, and the rack of clothing creaked beside them, but the knot Violet had tied held fast, and the two vehicles began traveling in the direction Klaus had pointed. We might as well get comfortable, Violet said. We'll be traveling a long time. All night at least, Klaus said, and probably most of the next day. I hope they'll stop and share the food. Maybe we could make some hot chocolate later, Violet said. With cinnamon, Klaus said, smiling as he thought of Sunny's recipe. But what should we do in the meantime? Violet sighed, and she and her brother sat down on a chair so she could lay her head on the table, which was shaking slightly as the caravan headed out into the hinterlands. The eldest Baudelaire put down the walkie-talkie next to the set of dominoes. Let's just sit, she said, and think. Klaus nodded in agreement, and the two Baudelaires sat and thought for the rest of the afternoon, as the automobile pulled them farther and farther away from the burning carnival. Violet tried to imagine what the VFD headquarters might look like, and hoped that one of their parents would be there. Klaus tried to imagine what Olaf and his troop were talking about, and hoped that Sunny was not too frightened. And both the older Baudelaires thought about all that had happened at Caligari Carnival, and wondered whether or not they had done the right things. They had disguised themselves in order to find the answers to their questions, and now the answers were burning up underneath Madame Lulu's table as her archival library went up in smoke. They had encouraged their co-workers to find employment someplace where they wouldn't be considered freaks, and now they had joined Count Olaf's evil troupe. And they had promised Madame Lulu that they would take her with them so she could lead them to VFD and become a noble person again, but she had fallen into the lion pit and become nothing but a meal. Violet and Klaus thought about all of the trouble they were in, and wondered if it was all due to simple misfortune, or if some of it was of their own devising. These were not the most pleasant thoughts in the world, but it still felt good to sit and think about them, instead of hiding and lying and frantically thinking up plans. It was peaceful to sit and think in the Freak's caravan, even when the caravan tilted slightly as they reached the beginning of the Mortmain Mountains and began to head uphill. It was so peaceful to sit and think that both Violet and Klaus felt as if they were waking up from a long sleep when Count Olaf's voice came out of the walkie-talkie. "Are you there?" Olaf asked. "Press the red button. Speak to me." Violet rubbed her eyes and picked up the walkie-talkie and held it so both she and her brother could hear. "We're here," she said. "Good," Count Olaf replied, "because I wanted to tell you that I learned something else from Madame Lulu." "What did you learn?" Klaus asked. There was a pause, and the two children could hear cruel peals of laughter coming from the small device in Violet's hand. "I learned that you're the Baudelaires!" Count Olaf cried in triumph. "I learned that you three brats followed me here and tricked me with sneaky disguises, but I am too clever for you." Olaf began to laugh again, but over his laughter the two siblings could hear another sound that made them feel as shaky as the caravan. It was Sunny, and she was whimpering in fear. "Don't you hurt her!" Violet cried. "Don't you dare hurt her!" "Hurt her?" Count Olaf snarled. "I wouldn't dream of hurting her. After all, I'd need one orphan to steal the fortune. First, I'm going to make sure both your parents are dead, and then I'm going to use Sunny to become very, very rich. No, I would not worry about this buck-toothed twerp. Not yet. If I were you, I'd worry about yourselves. Say bye-bye to your sister, Bada brats." "But we're tied together," Klaus said. "We hitched our caravan to you." "Look out the window," Count Olaf said, and hung up the walkie-talkie. Violet and Klaus looked at one another, and then staggered to their feet and moved the curtain away from the window. The curtain parted as if they were watching a play, and if I were you, I would pretend that this is a play instead of a book. Perhaps a tragedy, written by William Shakespeare. And that you are leaving the theater early to go home and hide under a sofa because you will recall that there was a certain expression that I'm sorry to say must be used 3 times before this story is over, and it is in the 13th chapter when this expression will be used for the 3rd time. This chapter is very short, because the end of the story happened so quickly that it does not take many words to describe, but the chapter does contain the 3rd occasion requiring the expression, the belly of the beast, and you'd be wise to leave before that chapter begins, because that time did not count. That's the end of chapter 12. I feel like I have a lot to catch up on, so let me do that now. Scroll, 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 scroll. Okay. Never trust Madame Lulu. Hi, Storm. How you doing tonight? Thanks for being here. I hope the next lock stream has oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a rough night last night. Be safe, Holland. I think V should do a totally interactive storybook. I think that'd be really cool for a reading stream. Oh, that would be cool. Yes, I think Tara had talked about it. Absolutely. I'm gonna be live reading a book. That's awesome. That's good, Susan. I'm looking forward to that. The Valley of Four Drafts. Like a wind, like drafts. Not giraffe. Draft. Hello, Team Perfect Stream. How you doing? You have such a good accent. Dutch? Oh. I don't have a Dutch accent that I know of. I found V's disdain for fake ridiculous. Hi, okay, later, Susan. Dang. See you later. Oh. Thank you for the host. Hi, E. Good for you, E. Congratulations. The most important thing of being a boss is good eyesight. And I want it to be a summer night where I can walk around in the darkness. What? I'm confused. Sorry, my contact's acting all weird. Whoosp. I don't understand what you're saying, Perfect Stream. Too clever for you. Olaf's had the same motivation for 9 books now and hasn't been successful. This guy needs to get a clue. It's true. Clue. I see your message, Holland. Thank you for the claps. Yellow applause. Yeah, drafts. I'm certainly sorry enough. That's true. We have one more chapter to read. You've got to give Olaf credit for his resolve. That's true. Have a good day, Perfect Stream. Alright, one more chapter and then we're at the end. Y'all ready? Let me just drink some water. Y'all ready for this? Okay. Chapter 13. With the curtain parted, Violet and Klaus looked out the window and gasped at what they saw. In front of them was Count Olaf's long black automobile, winding its crooked way up the road toward the peaks of the Mortmain Mountains, with the Freak's caravan tied to the bumper. They could not see their baby sister, who was trapped in the front seat with Olaf and his villainous girlfriend, but they could imagine how frightened and desperate she was. But the older Baudelaires also saw something that made them frightened and desperate, and it was something they had never thought to imagine. Hugo was leaning out of the back window of the automobile, his hump hidden in the oversized coat Esme Squalor had given him as a present, and he was holding tight to Colette's ankles. The contortionist had twisted her body around to the back of the car so that her head was lying on the middle of the trunk, between 2 of the bullet holes that had provided air for the Baudelaires on their way to Caligari Carnival. Like her co-worker, Colette was also holding tight to someone's ankles, the ambidextrous ankles of Kevin, so that all 3 of Madame Lulu's former employees were in a sort of human chain. At the end of the chain were Kevin's hands, which were gripping a long, rusty knife. Kevin looked up at Violet and Klaus, gave them a triumphant grin, and brought the knife down as hard as he could on the knot Violet had tied. The Devil's Tongue is a very strong knot, and normally it would take a while for a knife to saw through it, even if it was very sharp. But the equal strength in Kevin's 2 arms meant that the knife moved with a freakish power, instead of normally, and in an instant, the knot was split in 2. "No!" Violet yelled. "Sonny!" Klaus screamed. With the caravan unhitched, the 2 vehicles began going in opposite directions. Count Olaf's car continued to wind its way up the mountain, but without anything pulling it, the caravan began to roll back down, the way a grapefruit will roll down a flight of stairs if you let it go. And there was no way for Violet or Klaus to steer or stop the caravan from the inside. The Baudelaires screamed again, all 3 of them, Violet and Klaus alone in the rattling caravan, and Sonny in the car full of villains, as the 2 vehicles slipped further and further away from each other. But even though Count Olaf was getting closer and closer to what he wanted, and the older Baudelaires were getting further and further away, it seemed to the children that all 3 siblings were ending up at the same place. Even as Count Olaf's automobile slipped out of view, and the caravan began to bump on the bumpy road, it seemed to the Baudelaire orphans that they were all slipping into the belly of the beast, and that time, I'm sorry to say, counted very, very much. That's the end of book 9. I'll read the little preview here in a moment. 3 books away, I forgot about Grotto. Oh. It is all quite confusing. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the claps. I hope you enjoyed. Maybe you just skipped multiple books. Dang, that was quick. Yeah, that last chapter was a quick one. I'll read the preview for book number 10 real quick before I officially put the book away. To my kind editor, I hope you can read the weather here is so freezing that the ink in my typewriter ribbon occasionally... Here in the Valley of Four, the icy has... and the results are quite... As my enemies draw closer, it is simply not safe to place the entire manuscript of the Baudelaires, entitled The Slippery Slope, in your... Instead, I am taking each of the 13 chapters in different places. The world is... She will give you a key, which will... The first chapter, as well as a rare photograph of a swarm of... to help Mr. Hellquist with his illustrations. Under no circumstances should you... Trice. Remember your last hope that the tales of the book... To the General. With all due respect, Lemony Snicket. As you can see, there's gaps. I don't think anyone's gonna at you for that E. I stand corrected. It's okay. Alright, guys. We did it. We read book 9. So the next book stream that I do is gonna be the other book that the Ghost Dogs in Moon Lake is based off of. It's called Mystery by Moonlight. That'll be the next book that I read on stream. But then after that, we'll go back to Lemony Snicket and read book 10, which is The Slippery Slope. I can hear there are gaps. I tried to read it so that it was understandable English. You're welcome for the stream, guys. I hope you have a great rest of the day. I am going to go actually eat some food and then FaceTime my sister for a little bit. So I'll be back shortly. I am streaming tomorrow, Best Friends Day. Get hyped for Best Friends Day. So I'm going to go call my sister real quick, and then I'll see you guys around. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you all soon. As always, much love from me to you, and I'll catch you all soon. Bye.